If you learned that you can develop confidence, motivation, and trust in yourself all through the same training tool, would you like to know more? Welcome to the Sports Psychology of. Today we're talking about the sports psychology of values. What is a value? Why is it important for athletes to understand their values? And how do athletes even discover what they value? Through this process, you'll develop an inner compass that can lead you on the right path no matter your circumstances. Joining me today is Liz Robakiewicz to discuss how to practice values, the mental skills and mindsets enhanced through this work, how values help athletes trust themselves, and the differences between two athletes where one has done their values work and the other has ignored it. Liz is the owner of Momentum Mental Performance based out of Boise, Idaho. She works with youth and adult athletes across all sports, as well as stock market traders to leverage their strengths and values toward improved mindset and performance. Timestamps are in the description. Enjoy. Liz, I got to ask you, what got you into this field of sports psychology? Where does your appreciation for training the brain come from?
Yeah. So I think, my whole life I had a pretty strong upbringing of controlling what I can control. I didn't know that that was a sports psychology idea until college. But I was pretty used to seeking out, okay, which of this situation is actually in my control? So I played soccer. I went on to play college soccer at a Division I school. And I went in with a lot of pretty lofty expectations and hopes for myself. They were all very outcome based. I wanted the accolades, I wanted the stats, I wanted the playtime. Very quickly realized that those were slightly unrealistic. I had the reality check of Division I college sports. And so I had this moment of, I'm not going to reach those. Like, that is something, if I look at what's in my control, it's simply not. I think that's another reality check of college sports is effort doesn't always equal desired outcome. And so very quickly realized, I'm going to have a mindset shift. And what I figured out was the only thing in my control was my mindset. That was like my little bubble that no one could come into. It could be completely mine. And so I started implementing different things that really helped me find a motivation of, okay, you probably are not going to play this weekend, but how are you going to still crush it at practice? You probably are not going to get those accolades that history remembers you by, but how are you going to have an impact on your teammates? Worked really, really well. I found so much more motivation, so much more fulfillment. I was having fun. What I didn't realize was these were all sports psychology techniques. So I took a sports psychology class my junior year of college and had that aha moment of, wow, no wonder all of this works. It is actually backed by science and evidence and research and practice. And I also found out in that class that I could do this for a job, which is still crazy to me. So I kind of never looked back. I wanted to learn more for myself. I wanted to learn more for how do I help other people with this. So yeah, definitely college soccer, the reality check of that, and then kind of organically figuring out like this is actually something that works.
I think it's funny how many people in our profession have that aha moment, that epiphany of, oh, this is huge. And I had no idea this was a thing, or that I was even doing a lot of what we call sports psychology.
Yes.
So a lot of good experience that I'm sure you're bringing to your clients.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It was so funny to see like the things I was doing. I don't even know if I could put a name to it. Like maybe I was thinking, okay, I'm going to make sure that voice in my head is really nice, but I didn't know that that was self-talk. Or I'm going to make sure I do something before this game that I'm probably not going to step on the field for to make sure that I'm still like crushing it as a teammate. But I didn't know that that was a pre-performance routine. All these things that they were coming pretty naturally from trial and error. And then I realized, cool, these are actual concepts that people work with professional, college, all different kinds of performers on.
And I think a lot of athletes are already doing their own sports psychology, but there isn't as much of a structure or science to it. So while they have their own pre-performance routine, working with someone like a sports psychology coach can perfect that pre-performance routine and make their self-talk even better. So uh,
Yeah.
lot of good experience there. Let's get into this episode. We're talking about values today. So just to start us off, what is a value? Let's really hammer that down and make it clear what we're going to be talking about this episode.
Yeah. I define value as something that holds so much importance, so much priority in your life that across all domains, all different identities that you hold, you're trying to align yourself with to some extent. You are trying to connect with that thing. You're trying to display that thing, to prioritize that thing. It's something that's so innately important to you that it doesn't matter what you're doing, you're leaning in that direction. I think that's a really good way to define it because it's pretty self-explanatory of, it could click for you right then. Oh, I do always prioritize relationships. I do always prioritize discipline across all different domains of athlete, student, son, daughter, teammate, whatever it is. You kind of see these things come over and over again.
And there are so many different values that we can talk about and a lot of great ones. However, Liz and I decided to just focus on three different values that we're going to continuously come back to in order to make examples a bit easier to understand. So those three values are curiosity, self-discipline, and relationships. So we'll be using those in examples throughout the episode as well as other values, I'm sure. A popular phrase is practicing values. So rather than just saying what our values are, it's to actually live these values and embody them. What is there any other way you can clarify what it means to practice values for someone, either as an athlete or just a person?
Yeah. I think it can be as simple as checking in with yourself on how are you aligning with them. It can be a little bit more difficult because it's not a super objective statistic. You can't say I shot this many shots today at practice, I ran this far today in training. But I think we can check in and go, how did I do aligning with this value of self-discipline today? What concrete examples do I have to show for that? Was it that I went 100 yards further when I thought I had nothing left, that I pushed and went through the whole practice even though I wanted to stop 5 minutes early? I think we can check in with them, and that's a really good way to take them from being kind of broad, lofty concepts to tangible, concrete, I did this or I didn't.
And I also think while it's very valuable to look back on how you were living these values, it can also help you plan or strategize for something coming up. So, for example, if you have a big presentation in school or work coming up and you are checking in with your value of self-discipline and knowing that you have to put in the work and preparation for this presentation because that's what you value. So, basically, the way I look at values is you're not just saying what a value is, you're actually using the values to guide how you think and behave. So that's kind of what you were talking about of did I behave and think in alignment with my values? Or as I mentioned, how can I think and behave in this next shift, in this presentation by aligning with my values?
Yeah, totally. And I'm sure we'll get into it, but the process of figuring out what your values are is just like first base because, that's not going to bring us all the way home. That's a great starting point. But what does that actually mean? We're talking to athletes, we're talking to performers. We want to know like the tangible, what can I do to get better at this? So figuring them out is just first base. And then from there, we really need to have some tangible tools to practice them.
Yeah, so let's talk about that of okay, someone's bought into wanting to understand their values a bit more clearer. How would someone go about this? Is this like a one-time exercise they do, or is this over a very long period of time that they're doing this discovery process?
Yeah. So it starts with a one-time exercise. What I've seen to work best is something that's pretty accessible to most people. You can Google a list of values. That can be a great starting point. I'll forewarn you, they're usually pretty exhaustive. There are a lot of values. I think you mentioned that, Gabe, at the start. So it's a lot to start with. But what I do is I have my athletes, my clients go through kind of a process of elimination. So we have this big list of, oh my gosh, all of these things hold value, but how do I know what actually is valuable to me? I have athletes go through and just mark every single one that they feel the least bit connected to. Unfortunately, that only narrows it down by about 10%. It is still a very large list. But then we move into a second process of narrowing down, which is, which of these do I really want to prioritize? When I think about all the different roles that I have, all the different identities that I have, which of these are really important? Not just connecting, but these are important to me. Maybe star those. We see that tick it down a little bit more. And then we move to another level where we go, in 10 years, in 5 years, the person I want to be, what kinds of values would they hold? And that helps us narrow it down even more. Another process you can go through to narrow down is to think, what are some tangible things that I could see myself doing for these values? So again, if it's resilience, if it's relationships, if it's self-discipline, can I think of tangible things that I can do to grow that in my role as athlete, in my role as student, and ticking those down? And usually by going through this process, we see it come down to around 5, maybe 10. And that's a pretty manageable list. If we want to narrow it down further, it can also help to think, which of these are just important to me, not my parents, not my coaches, not my teachers, but just me, innately important to me. And all of those different steps can kind of get us down to a really solid list of, I would say, around 5 or 10. And that's a good list of core values we can work with.
So that's the one-time exercise that you start the values discovery process.
Mm-hmm.
And when you ask an athlete to ask themselves, what is innately important to me from these values, the way I kind of think of it as is, how do I naturally act in alignment with what values, and what can provide minimal tension in my decision making and actions? Does that sound right?
Oh, yeah, that's a great way to put it. And I think that can help us kind of reflect too. We think back on times where you just felt really, I mean, I'll use your word, you didn't feel any tension. You felt like you were in flow in whatever experience that was. What was going on? Was it the prioritization of relationships? Was it the prioritization of resiliency? Like figuring out in past experiences of tension and in past experiences of no tension, total flow, what was going on there? I think that's a great way to go about it too.
So when we talk about, part of this values discovery is the one-time exercise that you just laid out, but it also happens over a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Where my mind goes is doing a type of journaling after practices and games, and writing down maybe how you felt and how that connected to any values if necessary. And you can also do this maybe proactively. So going into a practice or a game with the idea of, I'm going to be curious today about what's going well throughout practice. If something doesn't go well, I'm going to try and attack that with a lens of curiosity, not negativity. So that seems like something that you would do many times throughout a whole season to really discover what values are leading to your best performances or minimal tension. Is there anything you want to add to that process, or any other ideas you have how an athlete learns their values over a long period of time?
No, I think that hits it right on. I think to some extent we kind of already know our values. I think, when I ask people what's important to them, we might have to ask it in a few different ways to really get to what those values are. The list is great because it's just like from the get-go, we're starting square one, what's important to you. But I think between the process of reflecting, narrowing down this list, doing your approach of, let's just look at a season, like what comes up, what is helpful, what's unhelpful. I think all of those are great ways to really grow that awareness and kind of get us, like I said, to first base of what even are my values.
Another thing I just remembered on how to continuously do this values practice over a long period of time is the rock that we learned about together, where you tape a word or write a word on a rock and just put it on your desk. And that can easily be one of your values. And you have a constant reminder every time you look at it to ask yourself, am I living my life right now in accordance with this value? And if not, how can I change that?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's such a great tangible tool. And to add to that, because like I said, we're at the start. We know these values, but I think to your point of having a visual reminder is one of the best things that we can do. I've had a client who on her soccer bag, she put a ribbon, and on that ribbon wrote an acronym for the 5 values that she wants to prioritize every day. So every day at practice, every game that she has, she's being reminded of, yeah, this is why I'm doing it, is these values. How do I want to display them today? And then I think just for our listeners who are probably like, I really want something so tangible. How do I track that I'm actually doing my values? Get numerical with it. I think it's great to journal it out and talk about how it went, how it felt, what kind of tension you felt if you weren't practicing it. But if you need something like, all right, out of 5 stars, how did I do on the value of curiosity today? How did I do on the value of resiliency today? Give yourself a score, right? Because this is going to be a process that there's not an end game. You're not going to get to a point and go, I have mastered resiliency. It's probably a lifelong process. So get comfortable with some days being 3 stars, some days being 5 stars, and kind of loving the process of it.
So let's say an athlete discovers what they value and what they constantly try and live out, but they wish they valued something else. So maybe they do value their self-discipline, but they want to value relationships more. Is this just going to cause tension because it's difficult to force somebody to change their values, or is there actually a way for someone listening to change what they value?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the conversation of values is really a conversation of identity perspective and talking about what are the things that make you you, not you as a soccer player, not you as the baseball player, but you as the person, kind of zooming out and then zooming in on the different areas that it shows up. Awesome. These are the values that describe you as a person. How does this come up in baseball? How does this come up in hockey? How does this come up in school? And I think that gives a really great perspective for athletes of, you're not just the athlete. You are a person who has this awesome talent to enjoy your sport, but that's not the only thing that you have going for you. And so I think when we talk about values, we are talking about what is just natural for you. Yes, these are things you want to prioritize, but they already are things you really find importance in. I think what you're asking is a great question for goal setting. I think if you're like, I want to be a Division I tennis player, you can totally backtrack and go, what kind of values lead to that? Like, which of those do I think I already have? Which ones do I want to try to get? And then from there, same process, get tangible with it. What does that mean to grow in the value of discipline? What does that mean to grow in the value of hard work, determination? And then kind of use that as your framework toward working toward that goal. But I think the whole while you're still holding on to the values that you've had innately. You didn't have to shoot for, you kind of already have.
I think there's minimal tension when we are not trying to force different values on how we behave and how we think. This reminds me of part of my refocus routine as a goalie. And I totally stole this from my professor, by the way. He was working with a surfer who was not having as much fun in their sport anymore. And they drew a massive happy face on their surfboard so they can constantly have that reminder of, hey, I got into this for fun. How can I live that value right now? So something I did was drew a small happy face on my glove, and I looked at it throughout a game when I would refocus. Is that me trying to force a value that isn't coming naturally to me, or is that a value that I already hold dear and I'm just trying to uplift it and boost it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think it could depend on the person. From your story, I feel like hockey being fun was something that was already in you, and maybe it just needed a little bit more fostering. And maybe what you were seeing before you had that reminder was the tension, maybe not aligning with the fun of hockey is what led you to say, I really need a reminder because this is not enjoyable. I'm not having fun. So I think it can depend on the person, but in terms of fun, ideally that is always a value that comes up for sport. Ideally, enjoyment is always a part of why we're doing what we're doing. And so I don't think that can hurt for anyone, regardless of the person.
I guess maybe a more interesting example would be, let's say we have a basketball player and they don't value teamwork as much as maybe they should. They value other great things like self-discipline, curiosity, and success. But now they feel like they're trying to force this value of teamwork and doing things that they don't feel like doing with their teammates, and then also on court play of involving their team when maybe this player knows that they're the best and they're the best chance for success. Do you think that's the example of how forcing values can create tension rather than just trying to boost what's already within us?
Yeah, I mean, I think that could totally lead to tension, but I think it's all in the approach. So even with that example, if this basketball player already values self-discipline, he already values success, I think it's let's use what we have. Okay, teamwork is a very necessary part of the team sport of basketball. Let's use the fact that you are self-disciplined, that you value success to fuel your efforts to grow in teamwork. So even though it may not be natural and it may bring some tension because it's not coming so naturally, we can use the things that are already natural for us to kind of guide us along toward that destination.
Okay, I'm realizing how good you are at dissecting how a value can work with you in any way possible, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I love looking at values that way because you're never going to see a values list that has something bad on it, right? We're never going to see like, I value losing. I value terrible teammate. Like that is never going to be on a list you find. If it is, we need to check into that. So we're never going to find a value being a bad thing, an unproductive thing. They're usually things that are strengths. And so that's exactly how I work with clients when I talk about values is these are things that are already going for you. They're so important to you and they're strengths. Let's use what you already have to get you where you want to be.
And this is a good opportunity to discuss something that maybe some listeners have some apprehension towards when you discuss how important it is to value yourself, not just as an athlete, but as a person who is partly an athlete. I think a lot of athletes hear that and go, that's not good for me because that can lead to complacency and not actually fulfilling my potential. I think it's very useful to frame how that can actually make you a better athlete. And the way I go to is looking at yourself as a person who's also an athlete will not lead to complacency. It will actually lead to less stress and tension to perform as best as you can. And so that stress response that's in overdrive for many people every single game, which leads to overthinking and shaky hands and a rapid heart rate is going to be dampened. What do you have to add to that on how that type of value can actually lead to you being better and not being complacent?
Yeah, I agree completely with everything that you just said. And I think that's why it's so important. And I'll be honest, it goes a little bit against status quo. Like a lot of the sports world, a lot of the performance world, we can branch up even into corporate performers. We're told that it has to be 100% full gas the entire time toward this single identity. And so it feels like, that's a little unconventional to say, actually, no, I'm not just a boss. I'm not just a salesman. I'm not just a basketball player. I'm so many other things. This is one facet of who I am. There is tension to that because it's not the normal route that we're told about. But man, does it help. I know this is anecdotal, but I have never had a client who has taken this zoomed out perspective and come back and said, man, this really hurt me. Like I'm doing so much worse. What I found is exactly what you said about the stress response. They're having so much more fun. They're finding so much more fulfillment in what they do that isn't based on stats. It isn't based on outcome. It's based on performance, effort, enjoyment, values. It's based on so many other things that they leave feeling, man, I'm so much more fulfilled and that was so much more fun. And just for anyone listening, like if you think about your best performance right now, was it a time that was a lot of fun or was it a time that it was like 100% gas pedal, so much pressure, so much weight on my shoulders? And I would probably guess most of the answers are, it was a time that was just fun. I was having so much fun with it, and I enjoyed it, and I did really well.
Let's discuss again. I love getting really concrete with the mental performance boosts that we talk about in this podcast. So let's talk about any mental skills or mindsets that successful athletes have that are enhanced through living your values and doing that work to become aware of your values. What jumps out at you as the big boosts from values?
Yeah. Well, this is a bit of a cop-out answer, and we can definitely get more specific, but I'm going to go ahead and say that I think all mental skills and all mental techniques are enhanced by aligning with your values. And the reason I think that and believe that so wholeheartedly is, in the same way that if a coach says, "Hey, Gabe, I need you to go do 20 sprints," that's not fun. No one enjoys doing sprints, but if you can take a second and align with, all right, cool. You know what? This isn't gonna be fun, but this aligns with the value of discipline. What a great opportunity to practice discipline right now. It adds so much more meaning and probably so much more. You're going to stick with it. You're going to finish the 20 sprints. And so in the same way of, a physical skill or a physical task like that, I think getting a mental skill of a pre-performance routine, of focus, of, resiliency, of motivation, all these different techniques and skills are going to have so much more fulfillment and be so much more enhanced by aligning them with your values.
It is a cop-out answer, but I do agree with you that there's a boost. Maybe it's bigger boosts to different things. Maybe your focus will have a bigger improvement than your pre-performance routine, but there does seem to be a boost to everything across the board when values are being involved and trying to be lived out in them. However, I'm still going to nail us down to a couple certain mental performance boosts. So let's talk about focus. How can an athlete's focus be better once they become aware of and live out their values and practices in games? Where I go with this off the bat is, so the refocus routine is one of my favorite mental skills because I just think it's so important for many reasons I cannot get into right now. But using your values as one way to refocus is a very effective way to improve the quality of your thoughts. And one way this could look is, okay, you just had a bad shift and you're trying to refocus because you're dwelling on the past. One way that you can refocus is using the value of curiosity and going, okay, I'm unhappy with this shift and it's distracting me. Let me just get curious and now I can learn from it. So it can boost my focus on what I can pay attention to undo or counteract any of the negative that I saw in that shift. Where do you have any other thoughts on how values can enhance athletes' focus?
I think that is great, the refocus routine. And I know a huge part of a refocus routine can also be the focal point, having something visual. And so, back to what you said about the smiley face on the surfboard or the ribbon on the soccer bag, I think even just having something that can get us out of our head, out of, ruminating on the mistake, kind of gets us to neutral. If we can look and notice this physical visual cue, it can get us to neutral. And then maybe we can add in even some more techniques that we have, some self-talk techniques, some motivational techniques, because we've kind of gotten back to neutral by using this focal point of value.
That's something I have not thought about until now when you can, because I always think of values as the word, right? But like you said, that smiley face that surfer painted on his surfboard, that's just putting your value in a picture. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways that you can live your values that I think most listeners didn't really understand until listening to this, that, okay, there's a lot of different ways that I can practice my values every day. So let's move on to motivation. How can living one's values enhance someone's motivation in practices, training, all that good stuff?
Yeah. One thing that I've seen so much with clients is their motivation for their sport is increased by thinking about the values that are being grown to go outside of sport. So, for example, a college runner I was working with, one of my favorite pieces of feedback I got from him is that technique that we talked about, that went into my value of exploration. Totally used that in my track workout the other day, like for sure. But I also used it in class the other day when we were talking about one topic, and I remembered that it tied to another. And I asked the professor, and now we had this awesome conversation. And I think just little stories like that show the value of values. They go from sport to school to relationships. And I think that that can bring so much motivation when you look at today, I have practice. I have an opportunity to put into practice all of my values. And they're not just for this sport, they're for me 10 years down the road. They're for me in this other domain tomorrow. They're for so much more than this sport. And again, back to your point of that being against like the status quo, and some people thinking that maybe makes them complacent to their basketball practice today. I've only seen it add effort and only seen it add excitement to they're growing themselves as people, not just as athletes.
I think it's a good idea to shift focus to a different value that can facilitate motivation. And how this might look for an athlete mid practice is a coach pushing their own agenda of their own values. So maybe they value success and self-discipline, but on this certain day, that's not helping this athlete that we're talking about here. This athlete is actually valuing relationships that they're building on their team. So when they realize I'm not having fun, I'm not motivated this practice, they can use a different value of curiosity and understand why they're not motivated and shift their value if that might work to, okay, I'm not going to try and live out this value of self-discipline because it's not working for me today. Instead, I'm going to focus on a different value like relationships, and how I can improve relationships today is by struggling with them and working hard with them in practice. So yeah, a lot of different ways that values work can enhance motivation.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that goes back to the point of we're never going to master values, constantly a work in progress. And so I think that's the fun of it though, is like you said, if one is not really motivating me today, maybe it's another one. Maybe it's back to that value that ideally every athlete has of fun. What am I going to do that's fun right now? Like that might motivate you more than what am I going to do to grow my self-discipline right now?
So true. Let's talk about this last kind of mental skill and mindset that can be enhanced through values of resiliency. So how can resiliency, and this is just someone's ability to adapt and overcome stress and adversity and setbacks, how can that skill be enhanced through awareness and practice of values?
Yeah. I think what's cool about resiliency is the previous skills that we talked about of motivation and focus all contribute to resiliency. Resiliency is this kind of umbrella one that a lot of what you're doing is probably helping toward resiliency. But I think values most specifically can help in the perspective change that they give. I think resiliency a lot of times is tied to some bit of failure, some bit of mistake. How are you going to adapt to that? And I think having that perspective shift of I have all these strong core qualities that I can lean on that the situational circumstance can't even touch. These are things that are important to me and constant for me in this specific situation. It can't touch those. And I think just reminding yourself of that you're so much bigger than the things you're having to adapt to. I mean, you're growing resiliency in the moment.
Part of that resiliency puzzle is dampening the burden of failure and setbacks and challenges. But then a lot of listeners might also wonder, okay, but how can values help me overcome the actual setback? Not just deal with it, but overcome it. And like we were talking about earlier, values can provide action. They can provide you with a plan of, okay, I'm going to do this to help overcome this setback or help improve on the mistake that I made, as opposed to the athlete who doesn't know their values and has less of a direction. And when an athlete doesn't know what to do, there's less confidence and more anxiety. So you can think of the athlete who has a very well put together pre-performance routine. They have confidence in their system, as opposed to the athlete who is just left to their thoughts. That's going to be a lot more anxiety inducing than the one who has a plan. So having values ready of I got these values in my back pocket that I can always use to direct how I will approach and adapt to situations, will leave someone more confident and also just more effective in overcoming these challenges.
Totally. Yeah. And I think the cool thing with resiliency is we can count on needing it. Like there are very few, if ever, any circumstances that we know exactly how they're going to play out, especially in the sport world. Probably the only thing we can count on is that we have nothing to count on. It is going to go in so many ways that we don't expect. So, man, what a great opportunity to say, I've got a plan for that. When things go crazy, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to recenter myself on this value. I'm going to direct my action with this value. I think you're exactly right. The confidence that that builds is awesome.
Something a lot of people in the sports psychology world try and teach their athletes is to trust themselves no matter what happens, because the unexpected will happen. But the superpower is having this ability to trust that your baseline skill level and personality will come through whenever this challenge does present itself. And like you said, the values are a great way to help instill confidence and trust in yourself when whatever you can't expect does happen.
Yeah, I love that. Trusting yourself. I love that.
Let's talk about how coaches can help their athletes and maybe just team understand and also live out their values. And maybe we can start off actually as what's the difference between someone doing individual values and then a team trying to learn their collective values? Like I always think about Ted Lasso slapping the believe poster above their or in their locker room, and that's one of their values is belief in the team and one another. So how does a team go about developing their team values?
Yeah. I think there's more similarities between the individual doing it and the team doing it than there are differences. I think the only difference is you're bringing in way more brains than just yours. You're bringing in way more innate qualities, innate strengths than just yours, but the process is still the same. We still need buy-in. We need everyone on the team to be bought in. Back to your Ted Lasso example, the buy-in that the team eventually had for that believe, like crazy. When it fell down, the world ended. Sorry if that's a spoiler alert for anyone, but the poster did come down at some point. So I think the buy-in is probably the most important, but I think you can have a lot of fun with that. I think it's a great way for coaches to build rapport with the team is facilitating this experience of what are our values as a team. And it can be a similar process of narrowing down, but ultimately feeling like majority of the team is bought into the one value you decide on, the few values you decide on, and you as the coach facilitating that. I mean, you're a part of the process. Like it feels like it is a team unifying experience. And then what I think is cool is it's something you can always come back to kind of give a refresher of that unity. Like, okay, at the start of the season, we decided on values ABC to be the ones that we want to really prioritize this season. So in the middle of the season, the lull of the season, when maybe spirits aren't super high, let's have a refresher. Let's talk about how we've been doing with these values, how we want to do with them for the rest of the season. And man, that's just such an awesome opportunity to get the team bonding over and over and over.
Could the question be as simple as this? So when we do this as an individual values exercise, we look at the list of what do I value? Could the question coaches ask be, what do you value that leads to team success, that a team needs to be successful? And then that's when everybody individually, but maybe in the same room, and then they can talk about them. Everybody crosses off the values that wouldn't align with team success. And again, this same process of narrowing down what are the 1, 2, or maybe 5 values that I find very important and necessary in team success. And then everybody can kind of have this discussion and discuss why they think this value is important. And maybe they just kind of get to a couple that seems to unify the whole team. Does that sound like how the process would go? Is there any difference, any change you would make to how that goes?
I think that could definitely work. Another route I think would be helpful is using the fact that you have so many more brains in the room than just your own. And so maybe you don't even need a list. Like maybe it's just as simple as everyone come up here and write something they think is important on the board. And let's go from there. Maybe let's vote, maybe let's discuss. But I think going ahead and using like, we already have kind of that square one list of values just in how many people are on our team. I think another great way to go about it would be kind of what we talked about in terms of goal setting. Maybe starting out with, all right, team, what do we want to accomplish this year? Maybe it's a state championship. I think that's a great way to go because you can kind of reframe the goal from being so outcome based to, all right, that's what we want to do. What values might lead to that? And now throughout the season, as you check in with these values, you're innately checking in with the team goal, but we're doing it in so much more of a performance based way rather than just outcome. Did we meet the state championship goal or not?
Think backtracking of what is our goal as a team, what values are going to help us get there is such a perfect example of what it looks like to actually practice the process. Because a lot of people like to talk about the process, but a lot of people don't know how to put that into action. And this is a great example of by focusing on these values that we deem important in meeting our goal, that is you focusing on the process and not an outcome, because a value is something that we have control over.
Yeah. And then as you're backtracking through that process, when you think you've gotten specific enough, you've gone from, okay, our goal is state championship, our values to get there are ABC. Hopefully this is what it looks like to practice those. When you think you've gotten to a specific enough level, go one more step. Go one more step so that at the end of practice on a Monday afternoon, you can measurably say, we encompassed this value today as a team, or we did not. At the end of a really hard loss, you can say, we encompassed this value, or we did not. So get really specific with it. I think that's where you're going to find the most adherence to this process is if you have that specificity.
Let's say the team comes up with a couple values that I think a lot of people would say are great, like believe and self-discipline. But let's say they voted on it, which I think is a great process because then you get the majority that believes in it. You're giving autonomy to the team. But with that process, there's probably going to be athletes who don't connect with the values that this team decides on. So what would you say to an athlete who doesn't really align with the values that the team collectively decided on?
Mm-hmm. I think that kind of goes back to what we were talking about with tension, even with your own individual values and the ones that you hope to have. Um, Looking at what you do value as an individual player and trying to find a connection of, okay, in my growing of this value that is very specific to me and we did not vote on to be a team one, in my growing of that, can I actually be helping this value? Would it be beneficial to my own values to work toward these team values? I keep coming back to discipline, but you're going to have to do things you don't want to do to practice discipline. That's kind of the whole point of it. So maybe working toward this team value that you didn't vote on, that can grow your own self-discipline. You're doing things that don't necessarily match what you want to do. But I think we can get creative with it, but we can always find a common link between our own value and what's demanded of us and use that as a strength to fuel us towards that value.
And going back to the other two examples of the values that we keep coming back to, so relationships. If you value relationships, but you don't value the team's goal, you can again shift your perspective in, okay, I'm doing this to align with my goal of facilitating my relationship with my coaches and teammates. And then curiosity. Maybe you don't align with the team's values, whatever they decide on. And so you can become curious about why that is and understand how you work and how you tick. And then that can allow space for a different conversation, maybe with a coach, a teammate, or the sports psychologist to allow you to live in alignment with your team's values a bit easier.
Yeah, I love that. Using what you have toward where you want to be. I love that.
So let's wrap up the conversation just a little bit. What would you say are big standouts between two athletes where one of these athletes has done a lot of values work? They They did the work to understand their priority values, and they also do the work to live those values every day. And then there's another athlete who hasn't done any values work at all. And let's just assume both of these athletes are the same in every other way, just this value stuff is different. What do you think stands out the most?
Hmm. My mind goes straight to failure, to managing failure, to managing mistakes. I said earlier, the one thing we can count on is things not going according to plan and things coming up that were not our idea of how it was going to go. I think we can add into that mistakes. We can pretty much always count on mistakes being a part of our journey at some point. And so let's just think of the stereotypical bad response to failure. We have anger, we have hitting things, shoulders down, head down, bad teammate. Like it is just, it's toxic. Let's just go with that as maybe the athlete who hasn't aligned with values. The way I see an athlete who's aligned with values differing in a moment of failure is the things we've talked about, the buffer that they have by, okay, I can come back to my values for just a second. I'm pissed about that mistake. It sucks. I don't like it, but I can have this little buffer of, all right, perspective change, focal point. I had a plan for this. I knew mistakes were coming. That's why I planned for them. And I think even just in having that buffer, it keeps us from falling into the emotions in ways that are, physically obvious in anger and frustration and it affecting our play. Even if we don't want to go with the stereotypical super angry athlete, maybe this athlete just doesn't play well the rest of the time because they can't stop thinking about this mistake. I think the athlete who is aligned with their values has such a better game plan for when these come up that you're just going to see it play out differently. You're going to see it play out in a more healthy manner of looking at failure as a way to learn, looking at mistakes as expected and able to move on from. So I think that's where my mind goes initially, is just with failure. What do you think? What would you see between two different athletes, one who is practicing values and one who wasn't?
Yeah, it's very similar of it dampens the negativity of a mistake or failure. And an example that I go to is, let's say you are the one who takes the game deciding shot. So let's say you're trying to tie it up, and if you miss it, your team loses. If you make it, you are alive. And let's say you miss it. And it's so easy to look at a value of courage. Do I value being courageous on the court? If you do, which I think a lot of athletes do, that they want to have this value of courage, you can look at that missed shot and understand, hey, this is part of the deal. If I want to be courageous, this is part of the deal that's going to happen, where I'm going to miss these shots that are very important to the game. Even though the whole team trusted me and it might work out other times, it's not going to work out every time, but I'm still doing the work to be courageous. And you're still going to be pissed off. You're still going to be so upset that we're not saying that's going to be taken away. But again, it dampens the effect that this has. Whereas maybe this doesn't affect you next game because you're aware of how you are in alignment with your values by taking that shot.
Yeah, I think that brings it full circle too, because what I'm thinking is like the identity part too. If the athlete who misses this game winning shot identifies only as this athlete who's taking this shot, man, how detrimental is it to miss the shot, right? That is going to affect that athlete for games to come. And so I think that goes back to the point of, it does not lead to complacency to zoom out on how you are as a person and the fact that you're not just an athlete. Because let's think about the athlete who misses the shot, who knows that they're not just their sport. They're ready for practice the next day. They're ready for the next game. They're ready to be courageous again, versus being kind of debilitated by that mistake to where now their performance is effective. So I think that's the perfect example of, it does not lead to complacency. It actually leads to, we're not being hindered by our mistakes. We're able to move on and keep going toward being better performers.
Okay, let's get into the action items. Actionable takeaways that listeners can take with them after this episode that they can use to improve how they live these values. And number one, as is very consistent with a lot of sports psychology skills, is awareness. So building the awareness of your values. You cannot live your values if you're trying to live 30 different values because they're all great. you have to do the tough work of narrowing down this big list or deciding what 2, 3, maximum of 5 values really resonate with you that you want to try and live out every day. Anything to add there, Liz, in how somebody can build that awareness of their values?
I think the list is a great way to go, but one thing that you said, Gabe, is kind of just taking a natural observation too over time. Maybe before you even tackle a list, you're looking at, all right, what came up in practice today? Any values, anything I would call a value? And maybe you'll see some congruency when you do tackle a list after that. But I think natural exploration and a list is a great way to grow that awareness.
And then after you have this small list of important values, you can start using them and living them. And what you'll need to do throughout this process is track the effectiveness of this value, because it's not going to be helping you that much if you aren't feeling much better after reminding yourself to live in alignment with this value, or you're still feeling a lot of stress and tension even after this reminder. So do some type of journaling system where maybe you rate each day how it felt to live in alignment with value A, and then the next day is value B. Have some type of system where you are understanding, okay, how am I doing? How is this value doing? Anything else there, Liz?
I think that's great. That's a great way to reflect. And I think, again, just getting so specific with it of maybe here's tangible ways that I can try to practice this value and practice today. Or after the fact, I can give instances, specific instances where I lived out this value, really having it be something that's not so broad, but you can point to it was used in this moment is a great way to track the effectiveness too.
And then another way to make this values work much more impactful is scattering reminders for yourself to keep living in alignment with these values, because although we are making it sound like it's the most important thing of all time, right now, you're going to forget to have these values at the front of your brain, especially in the beginning. So different types of reminders are having something written on your equipment bag, or drawing a picture that represents a value on your equipment or somewhere that you can look at constantly throughout practices, games, or like if you're at work, something on your desk. Any other ways of reminders, Liz, that people can constantly do to keep those values at the front of their attention?
Yeah, I think a couple could be, using a teammate, using a coach as a reminder. They can be an auditory reminder of, hey, how are you doing with this value today? I think another thing, which we're kind of relying on our brain a little bit here, but maybe at a certain point that you can count on for every single game, for every single practice, whether it's halftime, whether it's at the tip off at the start of the game, a certain point that you can count on being a cue for right now. I'm going to remind myself of how I want to practice value ABC today. So using people as reminders, using moments that you can for sure count on that day as reminders, and then those visual reminders. I think you're set up for success with all of those.
I love the idea of using certain times in games and practices as checking in with your values, and like the beginning of a game, checking in with, okay, how can I live in alignment with my value of courage in this game? That's so important and impactful.
Yeah,
And
I
that's,
want to jump in real quick
yeah,
too. I've seen this work really well with athletes is coming up with acronyms that show all of their values. And this is something that's funny as a mental performance coach, because I don't necessarily want to make the acronym, but sometimes I feel like that's best to take all of the values they've said. And I've seen athletes get pretty silly with it. I don't remember all of the values, but one athlete's was SHPLAT, SHPLAT. And he said that was the one thing that he will remember forever from our work together, is to remind himself of SHPLAT every time he's up to take a free throw. So acronyms are a great way to bring them all together too.
perfect. Love it. I love acronyms. So good point there. And why I love this idea of planning to check in with your values at certain points of your games is because it's similar to this last action item I have here, as plan to respond to adversity with values. So planning to respond to a mistake or a turnover with curiosity, and having that as a system that is prepared to act to dampen the effect dampen the negative effect that these turnovers, bad shifts might have.
Yeah. And just knowing that by planning that, you are growing your confidence so much to go into a game and say, when failure comes up, when a mistake comes up, I can almost look at it and say, I was expecting you. I have a plan for you. The confidence I feel even just saying that is so good. So know that the work that you're doing to plan is also work you're doing to grow your own confidence.
Perfect. This was a great conversation on values. Liz, thank you so much for joining me. Where can people find you if they'd like to get in touch?
Yeah. So much fun today. I loved it. So my name is Liz Robakiewicz, and my practice is called Momentum Mental Performance. So you can find me at momentummp.com. And that's just a great place to kind of set up a free intro call to learn more about me, what work with me looks like. And I'd love to help you figure out your values and how they play out for you.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Liz, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Thanks, Gabe.
Thank you so much for listening. We hope you took something valuable away from this episode. Stay in the loop by following the Sports Psychology of on your go-to podcast platform, and find clips of each episode's best segments on YouTube, as well as Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. Do you want to take your mental game to the next level? Try out one-on-one sports psychology coaching with me, Gabe Zellico, by visiting my website, zellicoperformance.com. You can book a free intro call where we'll discuss your goals, obstacles to success, and determine if we'd be a good fit to move forward. You can also email me directly at thesportspsychology@gmail.com regarding one-on-one coaching or the podcast. Links to social media, my website, and email are all in the description. Thank you again for listening.